Well, I decided to get out and about today. Probably not the wisest place to come to read lots of paperwork. However, the Post Office brackets Horizon System close brackets Offences Bill has just been published. So this is the government's idea for how to deal with the convictions of all the sub-post people. And I just thought it might be quite interesting, first of all, to look at what's in the bill, although possibly I should explain exactly what a bill is. But also this just deals with the convictions and not the compensation. So I thought what I could also do is chat about some of the various compensation schemes, because there are actually three running in parallel. But first of all, what is a bill? A bill is proposed draft legislation. So a government or a sponsor of a bill, if it's a private member's bill, will put forward and say, this is something we'd like to introduce. And then it goes through various what we call readings in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, where there are opportunities to suggest amendments or alterations before the final bill is passed, and that goes off for royal assent and becomes an Act of Parliament legislation. Because there is one thing in here that I think is going to be very problematic. But I won't read it all to you because, oh God, it's windy here, because the devil's in the detail. But I'll try and explain in lay people's terms what it says. But the important bit is Section 1, the proposed or Clause 1 as it's a bill, quashing of convictions for relevant offences. And 1.1 says, every conviction to which this Act applies is quashed on the coming into force of this Act. So the idea is, as soon as this Act gets royal assent, all relevant convictions are suddenly quashed. So this is Parliament effectively legislating sort of, a factual position. They're saying, notwithstanding everything that's happened in the courts, all these convictions are quashed. However, there is a little catch there. The Act applies to a conviction in England and Wales for a relevant offence where A, the offence was prosecuted by the Post Office or the Crown Prosecution Service, and B, the conviction has not been considered by the Court of Appeal. And that's going to be the problematic bit. But what's a relevant offence? Effectively, they set out certain dates and they say the offence is one of false accounting, fraud, handling stolen goods, money laundering, theft, or an ancillary offence relating to any of those offences. So if it's something that flows from one of those offences, then that's also covered. But it wouldn't cover a situation where somebody had been fired, for sort of assault or anything like, harassment or something like that. But what's the big problem with the bit about if it's been appealed? Well, this eliminates anybody who's actually tried to appeal their conviction and been rejected is excluded from this scheme. Now, the problem there is a lot of the convictions were before, a lot of the appeals were before it was generally accepted that the Horizon system was faulty. Now, there are some appeals where they're saying, well, the Horizon evidence wasn't relevant, so therefore, whatever the problem may have been with it, there was still enough evidence there. Or, you pleaded to false accounting, because even if you're saying, well, the system was, there was a problem with it, the way to deal with that would have been to contact the helpline and get it sorted out, not juggle the books to try and get the zero balance. But I've said in other videos, the way the system works, if the balance wasn't a zero at close of play, to use that horrible term, you couldn't log on to the system the next morning, so you just couldn't work. So people were going, well, I'll just put some cash, I'll say this is cash in the account or something like that, just to get to a zero balance so they could trade. Because otherwise they were waiting for up to 90 days for the error log to be produced. And as we also know now, that system wasn't working properly. So, it wouldn't have assisted them. So I suspect that is something that people will want to see amendments on, especially as the scheme itself is very broad. I mean, people who didn't appeal will automatically get their convictions overturned, without sort of any investigation. Now, the justification for that is, all this idea of separation of powers, that Parliament shouldn't tread, in the court's remit. I mean, two things there. First of all, we don't actually have separation of powers in this country. People always talk about it. Oh, there's got to be this line, between the executive and the judiciary. Lord Chancellors, for example, it's quite common for the Lord Chancellors. They're a member of the executive because they sit in the cabinet. They sit in the House of Lords because they legislate. But also, Lord Chancellors used to sit as judges. They tend not to now, but they used to do. So that was somebody, a Lord Chancellor basically operated in all three areas. So there's definitely no separation of powers there. And also, you can have members of Parliament who sit as part-time recorders as judges, and they could be in the cabinet as well. So again, no separation of powers there. And also, this is a bill that effectively by, just de facto by sort of, on the, just the relevant minister saying so, does overturn, convictions that were in the courts. So it seems really there's a bit of a contradiction there that's saying, well, we've got to put this in because we don't want to tread on the court's toes. However, we are going to tread on the court's toes when it comes to first instance convictions. So, like I say, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I mean, obviously, people won't want this to be delayed any longer than it has to be, but I think that is something that probably will be addressed. So my prediction is that bit, section 1(2)(b), will actually be amended. And they'll probably deal with it some way of saying, they could just say, even if there's been a rejected appeal, you're still exonerated. Or there could be some way that says we'll adapt criminal procedure rules 57 just to say second appeal is allowed, something like that. But that overturns the conviction. What about actually getting all your money back? Well, there are three schemes. There's the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, there's the Group Litigation Order Scheme, and there's the Overturned Convictions Scheme. And who are they run by? Well, the Shortfall Scheme is operated by the Post Office, the Group Litigation Order Scheme is operated by the Department for Business and Trade, and the Overturned Conviction Scheme is operated by the Post Office. Group litigation is, we don't have class actions as such in this country, but a group litigation order is the nearest thing we have, where they selected a bunch of people and said, right, you can be all the test cases. What are the purposes of the relevant schemes? The Shortfall Scheme is a scheme for non-convicted postmasters who were not part of the group litigation case. So that's people who didn't actually end up getting convicted, but there might have been civil proceedings against them to recover this illusionary money. Because we have this idea in civil proceedings that if somebody ends up with money or property that they shouldn't have, it's called unjust enrichment because, they had no entitlement to it. So you can actually bring a claim in unjust enrichment and say, I just want back that property that you had no rights to. We can also go for what we call a statement of accounts or a profit of accounts or an account of profits, where you basically say, we want to know what you did with all our money. Because if the post office has had it and stuck in a bank and got interest, why shouldn't the postmasters get that? What about the group litigation? That's a scheme to top up redress from High Court group litigation order case. In other words, yes, people did get some compensation, but everybody's complaining that it doesn't come anywhere close to the actual losses. So the idea is just to actually make that right. And the Overturned Conviction Scheme is a scheme to provide financial redress for people who are wrongfully convicted of Horizon-related offences. How are the claims assessed? The Shortfall Scheme, that's an independent panel comprising legal, forensic, accounting and retail experts. The group litigation stuff, that's actually assessed by the Department of Business and Trade, although with the advice of Adelshaw Goddard, that's a firm of solicitors. And they assess those claims. They've actually published how they look at that. So effectively, they just assess the actual real damages. And with the Overturned Conviction Scheme, although that's operated by the Post Office, it's got oversight by the department, and they've actually dragged some retired Supreme Court judge, Lord Dyson, out of his retirement, and he's going to sit and evaluate these. And we call it early neutral evaluation. In other words, look, I'm just going to come here and just cast my eye on it and say, what do I reckon at first instance? You can get upfront offers on these. With the first two, it's up to £75,000. They can say, look, you can have this, take it or leave it. With the other scheme, it's £600,000. However, you can say, no, I still want to pursue this further. So can you actually get any of the upfront offer, even if you say, well, yeah, that'd be nice for a start, but I'm not letting this one drop. Actually, yes, you can accept the 75,000, or you can they can actually offer you up to 100% of that, and you can still argue for more. Similarly with the group litigation scheme, they have actually made interim payments. And with the other scheme, where the max, they can give you £163,000 up front, and they can actually later top up that to £450,000 minus any payments that have been paid so far. So it is all a bit complicated, but obviously people are affected in different ways. So there you go. I just thought, as always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely useful. It's possibly even more than vaguely accurate for once, because I'm actually reading it off a piece of paper. Look, I even printed off the bill for you. So there you go. Where am I today? This is a quoit, which is an old type of burial mound. So back in the day, somebody important would have been buried in there, and it would have all been covered with earth on top, and you see those like barrow shapes. This, despite the fact this is about at least 3,400 years old, it's actually been reassembled relatively recently, because some friends of mine were involved in that. I mean, it all collapsed, but they now have put it all back using the original authentic ways they would have been put up, assuming that back in the Neolithic they had access to JCBs. I did actually point out and said, if you're doing it completely authentic, you should cover it back in earth, but they weren't. They decided to leave it looking like this, which is quite pretty. And I came here because had it have continued torrential rain, I was going to hide underneath it. But there you go. Oh yeah, and yeah, please consider clicking, liking, sharing, subscribing, etc., etc.